Hi, thanks so much for joining in. You know, there's an old Beatles song and the lyrics go like this. When I get older, losing my hair many years from now, will you be sending me a Valentine, a birthday greeting, or bottle of wine? And if I'd been out till 2:45, would you lock the door? Will you still need me? Will you still feed me when I'm 64? It's a fun song, but it's an important question. A lot of young Indians are now choosing to not have children. More and more families are splitting and going nuclear. And that means that life after retirement will look very different 5 years from now. But can you imagine what it would be 20 to 25 years from now? Will senior living facilities be a reality? I know the answer to that because they are a reality today as well. And that's what I'd like to speak about on Moneywise. Joining me is Adarsh Narahari, who's the founder and managing director of Primus Senior Living, and Vishal Dhawan, the founder and chief executive officer of Plan Ahead Wealth Advisors. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for taking the time. And I think this is an interesting and important conversation to have because a lot of people saving today will do so thinking about the next 20, 25, 30 years. And a lot of people might even be contemplating things about their own parents, right? So let's set the context. And who better to do that than somebody who's ventured into the business? First of all, your business is in the senior living space. Tell us very quickly what it's about and then we'll dive into it.
Thank you, Alex. So senior living is a housing solution which essentially reduces the process of aging and improves health span in elders. We are all taught for way too long about lifespan because everybody gets a birth certificate and a death certificate. None of us are really measuring quality of life. And what senior living facilities do is they create an ecosystem where one can slow down the process of aging through the principles of living in a blue zone.
What is a blue zone for those people that are unfamiliar?
So for those people who are unfamiliar, a blue zone is an area or a village. There are essentially 6 blue zones in the world, like Okinawa in Japan, Sardinia in Italy, Loma Linda in California, and few others, where although people are of different genetic backgrounds, cultural backgrounds, weather condition, they all live greater than 100, and they all live actively, close to 100 or above. And then this research was done by this Japanese scholar, and he came up with this word called the blue zone, where he said that if people are physically active, they're surrounded by friends. If they don't retire, they follow their passion. If they are mentally stimulated and they live connected to nature, they would live a lot longer, happier and healthier. So senior living communities follow these pillars of anti-aging. But there are 2 crucial elements that book didn't think of, which is right nutrition and preventive health. So communities like ours give an ecosystem where people can hang with other people, be active, be mentally stimulated, follow their desires or fulfill their bucket lists, and get the right preventive health and nutrition.
We'll talk about the global landscape and what this picture in India looks like. It must be nascent. It has to be nascent because I think the very aspect of senior living is something that is taboo. Right? The idea in the Indian household is that I must care for my parent and they cannot live apart from me, particularly in their old age. This is something that is expected by some, demanded by others. And it's interesting because we've seen so many shades of this change over the years where some people are now saying, look, you live your life. I'll take care of my requirements. I've saved all my life. If I need something, I will call you. Where do you see on this spectrum of society senior living?
So I think it's a very interesting point because what's happening is traditionally people have looked at it as saying that, I have my children and they will be my standby option. In fact, not just from an emotional perspective or a physical perspective, but also from a financial perspective.
Yes.
Now that has shifted because on one side you have financial independence that's now become a more common thing as people age because they've planned for it a little bit more in advance. But the emotional and physical aspects of it still require support and help. And I think where senior living steps in is probably address partly the financial aspect, but very greatly the emotional and physical aspects of it. Because aging is not just about whether you have that one magic number for retirement or not. There are just so many dimensions to retirement. And the way to think about it is really, you probably end up working for 30, 40 years, and then you end up being retired for 30, 40 years as well. So it's a completely another life, and therefore it requires a lot more thought than just the money part of it. And I think that's where senior living's coming in and saying, let's answer other questions besides the money question.
But isn't it interesting, because we have to draw the distinction, Adarsh, between an old age home and senior living, because I don't think what you're doing and the idea of senior living is an old age home, is it?
No, absolutely not.
Yeah. So you want to draw the distinction and tell people what that is?
Absolutely. I think over decades we've been conditioned to think that the best caregiver for a parent is only the child. And the second thing is that because of maybe Bollywood and some other stereotypes, this Vridhashram word has come about. But if you look at communities like ours, and if you look at globally what senior living does, there's a lot of empirical data to show that there is improvements in health span and actually better relationship with family members when people give each other space and they're happy from the inside. Because what I've learned, over a decade in this business is as we get older, the core emotion that is very strong for us, it's not money, it's not power, it's not love. The emotion above all of that is relevance and independence. And this is what senior living does to people. It puts power back in their hand so that they feel a sense of accomplishment of having to not depend on anybody, but love everybody equally nevertheless.
My understanding of how this would work, and Vishal, you've seen global communities as well, you please weigh in as well,
Sure.
is these communities that are created, usually they're gated communities, and you pay a certain fee as a person that wants to participate or live in these facilities, and you have caregivers and you have doctors on call, you have various other facilities, meals are taken care of, but there is a monthly or an annual fee that is paid. Is this how Primus works as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So it would mimic living in your house, except that one would get guaranteed services.
Okay.
So typically services would include stuff around health, food, concierge, events, and the common area maintenance. Now all of this comes together where people spend more time in the clubhouse or in the common areas and less time inside their own homes. And just by that one thing, we actually improve health span. Let me give a more relatable example, Alex. Can you think of one profession where people live the longest and it's stressful and people think that it's very hectic, but still they live long?
I have no idea.
So an easy answer is politics and politicians, right?
Yeah, okay. All right.
Let's keep the politics aside in this conversation. Let's look at it from the lens of aging. Are they physically active?
No.
Hell yeah. They are.
No, come on. Okay,
Politicians
okay.
are physically active.
Depends.
They're doing rallies,
It
they're
depends.
meeting
Okay,
people.
fine, all right.
Are they surrounded by people? Yes.
Okay.
Are they mentally active? Yeah, they're always thinking of how to win or what the opposition is up to.
Sure.
Do they have a strong sense of purpose? Hell yeah. They fight disease, they fight everything. Look
Sure.
at some of the politicians from here. Look at our Prime Minister, look at Mr. Trump.
Yeah.
Right? Their purpose is so strong that they fight disease.
Yeah.
Do they take care of their health? Yes. Do they, more or less, they eat right? Yeah. So they are following the principles of blue zone living without realizing it. And now you extend that to people who didn't have a traditional retirement, who have not retired, who are active, who are surrounded by people, who have not lost their sense of purpose. They would live longer, healthier, happier. And this could be very pronounced during COVID, because you might not have seen certain people for 1 or 2 years, and some of them look like they aged 10 years, and some of them look like they didn't age a single day. Now go back and think of the principles of blue zone living, and then you'll be surprised to find that the people who didn't retire, who are active, who are surrounded by people, actually age very slow.
Okay.
That's all senior living does. It just provides a conduit for people to live their best life.
This is actually an interesting concept, because at the same time as he's talking about the need to perhaps extend the time frame that you're active, a lot of people are talking about retiring early and saying, I don't want this grind every day. But we've spoken about this aspect as well. Just because you give up your 9 to 9, and I'm not saying 9 to 5 knowingly, it doesn't mean that you stop earning or you stop doing things that will give you remuneration, right? So, but Vishal, interestingly, this week I have spoken to one 88-year-old managing director of a company who was speaking on the quarterly results. And we all know Mr. R.C. Bhargav, who's been at Maruti Suzuki for the longest time. He's referred to some Japanese concept, ikigai is one of them, right?
Right.
How important is that? And finding that purpose, because not everyone can find it. Let's face it, not everybody has that purpose in life. Not everyone's a politician, but not everybody has that golden purpose in life either.
Absolutely, and I think it's something that everyone who's retiring early or wanting to retire early really needs to think about.
Yeah.
That is it financial freedom that they're seeking, or is it actually just having all the free time in the world?
Yeah.
And I think these are two very different things. I think having all the free time in the world is actually very boring after a while from what we hear from other people. However,
You would have no idea about that.
we would have no idea about that as of now, at least. But I think it's very interesting to look at retirement in phases as well, right? So typically, people think about it as a bit of a continuum,
Yeah.
like a 30-year, 40-year continuum. And obviously, as medical advancements happen, you probably are talking about 50, 60-year retirements as well.
Yeah.
Typically, you sort of break it up into phases and say, okay, you have these, what we call the go-go years, where you're just happy to be out of work and having a lot more time. And then you go out and do everything that you didn't get the chance to do. Then you get to those slow-go years where, that excitement has become a little less.
Yeah.
You've seen the world, you've done, you've attended every wedding, every engagement, every social function, etc. And you're like, now I'll be picky and choosy about where I go.
Sure.
And that lasts a reasonable period of time as well. And then you get to these no-go years where you don't want to go anywhere. You're just happy doing whatever you're doing. You're not trying to prove anything to anyone. You're sort of saying that, I'm sort of looking at how I can be my best in the last
You're
decade of my
conserving
life,
energy,
probably. That's right.
maybe.
So typically what will end up happening is that as you go through these phases of retirement as well, there is a transition that automatically ends up happening very often with purpose, with health, with everything else automatically also. And you want to be able to manage all of that. So one of the things that does happen internationally with senior living, and some of it is coming to India as well, is looking at these phases also from the way senior living communities are put together. So you have these go-go years, which are very active, lots of people around you, you exercise, you do stuff which improves your health, eat healthy, all of that. Then you get to those slow-go years where you may need some assistance. So semi-assisted sort of living is there because not every faculty that you have may be working at its best. Mm-hmm. And you may need some assistance. And then you could end up into like fully assisted living. And each of these are important. And what tends to happen is the dependency on other people, including family, friends, well-wishers, etc., keeps increasing as you transition from one phase to another. Yeah. So I think it's very important to think through the fact that, probably most people will go through all of these phases through their retirement. We deal with a lot of people who tell us, let's assume that I will pop it at 65. And we are like, you can't control this, right? I mean, you could be living at 90, and unfortunately you could have the last 15 years of your life which are not the way you wanted to see yourself or wanted to imagine yourself. Yeah. So I think it's important to think about senior living from the life stage perspective as well, saying that, as I go through these phases, what's going to be the best way I can approach each of them?
That's very well put. And in fact, in financial planning, more than anything else, I think it's best to assume the worst when you're planning for something. In this case, living long is not necessarily the worst, but it's a good idea to have that benchmark. I guess in that sense, you're assuming that you will need far more than you might originally have penciled in for your retirement corpus or kitty. I want to understand the landscape of senior living in the country right now. How many service providers like yourself, how large is the industry, and how large do you see it growing?
Yeah. Let me just step in on the last question and then I'll answer yours. So purpose doesn't have to be anything to do with money, right? We have a gentleman with us called Srinivas who learned French at 75, whose dream was to learn French, and now he teaches French online to kids all over India. Purpose can be spiritual, it can be inward. So it doesn't have to be money making in any way.
Yeah.
So long as people have purpose, they will live much longer and healthier. So moving forward to the next question, if you look at the global scenario, let me start there. Typically between 6% to 11% of all people above 60 live in a retirement community. This is in the US, in the Australia, in Japan, and in UK. India has 160 million elders. Obviously, that extrapolation doesn't make sense. But there have been a bunch of reports from JLL, PwC, CII that have pegged the formal demand for senior living at about 4 lakh units currently. Right? And the current supply is just 20,000 units. So there's a large gap right now. The second bigger trend is India is already 60% nuclear as we speak. Urban India is 76% nuclear. right? So nuclear families are here to stay.
Yeah.
As far as the number of people are concerned, I think multi-city players, there are about 4 or 5 of us currently in India. There are a lot of regional players who are each city based, and there are people who are into assisted living and nursing care. So senior living can be categorized as active senior living, assisted living, and nursing or palliative care. Think of it like the life stages that Vishal mentioned. So long as people are jumping on their feet, it would broadly be classified as active senior living.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you've provided me with that context, but I also want to understand the cost involved, because ultimately this is something that would span a large number of years if you choose to get in at 65, 70, or even before that, 60 or thereabouts. And but incidentally, what is the average age of the people that decide to take the service?
So the average age of our occupied units are about 72. The average age of my new buyers are about 65. But we're seeing that drop every quarter.
You say buyers. I just want to establish this, right? Because it's, to a certain extent, this is part of the cost.
Yeah.
In the service that you provide, my understanding is that you tie up with developers and they sell units?
No. So we are both the developer and the operator.
Okay.
So in Chennai and in Bangalore, we are the developer and the operator. Beyond these two regions, like in Bombay, Calcutta, we have partnered with local developers where we co-develop it.
Understood.
Yeah.
So this service is only available for people who buy into the projects
That's
that you
correct.
sell. But anybody can buy.
Yes. So anybody can buy. What we have seen is that the emotion to leave back an asset for the next generation is very strong amongst Indian elders. So they would like to buy and bequeath it to their children. So we have seen that there's a strong bias towards purchase. Anybody can buy it. There's only a restriction on who can occupy it.
Sure.
So people above 55 are allowed to occupy it.
Okay.
And once they occupy it, we give various services, for people.
But globally, is this the predominant route where people buy actual assets, or is it more of a tenant kind of a scenario?
So globally, it is mixed depending on the country. For example, in the US, in active senior living, sale is still predominant, but in assisted care, it is largely lease.
Sure.
In Japan, it's almost all lease. So it's country to country, but the larger model is lease or rent.
And
I see that as a trend coming to India fairly soon, because people like the flexibility and children love the flexibility that they can afford for their parents.
Okay. And the cost of the service. So there's the cost of acquisition of the flat. What is the cost of the service currently?
Yeah. So the cost of service is similar to what one would spend in their own house for a couple. So for a couple in our communities, if you remove food, it's about 14 to 18,000 rupees for like a typical 2-bedroom, 1,000 square feet unit. That would include healthcare, that would include concierge, events, and the common areas, or what we call society charges. Food is about 6,500 rupees per person per month. So with food, with GST, with everything, it would be about 35,000 rupees, which is similar to what elders would spend, but you would get guaranteed services.
Sure.
And you don't have to, break your head about making sure things get done.
Okay. So I wanted to talk about the cost, because ultimately you plan for something like this. And if you build inflation into this, Vishal, you're talking about something that maybe somebody has to plan 3 years, 5 years down the line, maybe even tomorrow, if somebody's watching this and thinking about their parents and whether or not they'd have a healthier lifestyle if they want to move to something like this, or something for yourself, which could be 20, 25 years down the line. How do you plan for something like that?
So I think there are, again, various parts of this entire experience. So one is the living part of it, which of course, depending on the kind of lifestyle you're leading, I think it's very important for families to think about the kind of lifestyle versus the kind of senior living community. The two need to match, because for people who are used to an flamboyant, expensive lifestyle,
Sure.
This will feel like scaling down, which is not something that they'll enjoy. At the same time, if you put someone who's used to leading a frugal life into a very expansive lifestyle, you'll see the exact opposite reaction. So I think it's really important to do the right kind of match on this. And I think once you've done that match, you then need to start thinking about a few things. Number one, this is going to be on top of bigger healthcare things that might come up during your lifespan. So I think as people live longer, you will have critical illnesses. Some of those will be really expensive to treat. You may have some insurance, but that may not be enough. You need to put your own money in there. So you need healthcare provisioning to be significant, especially in a country where healthcare inflation still ranges in the double
10
digits.
to 14%.
That's
yeah.
right. So it's really important to build that in. The second is that, besides the living that you do, you will have other things that will emerge. You will still want to travel, maybe to meet your children or maybe for leisure. You will still want to change your car every X number of years. So you will have other costs as well. So when you think about your entire retirement, one part of it is living cost, and of course the house that you live in, whether it's a senior living home or your own home. But the other aspects are equally important. And what we find very often is some very simplistic math getting done, saying,
Yes.
if I had 1 crore rupee number, and I spend 6 lakh rupees, 50,000 a month, I'm home. I mean, this is besides the inflation problem, which is a completely different problem. But even otherwise, living expenses are only a subset of what you will end up spending during your retirement. So it's important to plan that right. There's also very, very important assumption around longevity. Yeah. And clearly, like you mentioned earlier, in this case, longevity is bad for your finances. So you need to plan it for much longer. Obviously, if something happens to you sooner, that's different. But we also need to remember that we are planning for 2 partners.
Yeah.
And very often you will find that in this generation today,
one will significantly outlive
the other. And therefore, it's not just the way that you do the math, but it's also about the fact that 2 people need to go through a certain lifespan. What we do also see very, very commonly is this challenge around what do you want to leave? And, there was a mention about this earlier as well, saying, how do I want to approach leaving the house versus, consuming everything that I have? I think that answer really will come from, do you have enough?
Sure.
If you have enough, then maybe you can explore leaving that house to your children. Yeah. But sometimes what we find is people don't have enough, but they still want to leave that house to their children.
But to that point, I wanted to ask, and it's not a big concept here in India, but I was thinking about this purely because of the fact that they're selling flats, which then tie into senior living. A reverse mortgage is something that is very popular in the West, right? Because a lot of people choose not to leave their property, and I know that I'll probably get trolled in the comments for even suggesting this. But frankly, a lot of people are choosing not to have children. So who would they give their flat to if they have inherited or if they've bought? Ultimately, they would have to get rid of the asset. So is a reverse mortgage on the cards?
Oh, absolutely. I think, the reverse mortgage model came into India quite a few years ago, but it hasn't taken off for exactly the reason that there are lots of stipulations around the way a reverse mortgage can actually be done. And I think people haven't necessarily got around to accepting that for their children to get this asset, if they have children, they will have to pay the financial institution back a certain amount of money at the end, which sort of is the reverse of what you're actually thinking, saying that, I want to leave this back as a legacy, not the reverse where I want my kids to buy this out.
But how does it work? Can you explain why you're saying that?
Yeah, so typically what will happen is that a reverse mortgage has certain conditions around it, the kind of house you can put in a reverse mortgage, the fact that you have to live in that home, you can't, use it as an income source, etc. Now, once you've gone through that process, there's a certain assumption around life expectancy, etc., that's got built in.
Yeah.
You can't be removed from that home, but at the end of the day, post you, that asset will be liquidated to pay back the financial institution, or the person who's inheriting it has to then pay the financial institution back
in order to
and get
keep
the asset,
house. Yeah.
Right? And therefore, that's where the confusion normally happens, because typically most reverse mortgages are built around 20 years. Now, what if you live for 30, 40, 50 years, which is happening because people are living much longer. And I think there's still this sort of mathematics in people's heads that a reverse mortgage is a bit like a loan that you're taking, and loans in general amongst people who are older are anyway taboo.
Sure.
So it's sort of playing into a psyche which is very hard to overcome.
But do you think that the deals that are currently being offered are lucrative enough? Because that's another aspect. The rate of interest that you're charged, or rather that the bank pays you, is not necessarily a great deal for the people that are going in for this right now.
That's right. But I think the way to think about it is also that, typically whenever you're building long-term projections, especially in a country like India, where over a period of time interest rates should come down, you will find that today's deal will always feel suboptimal,
Sure.
but it'll look great in the future when interest rates have actually gone down.
Okay.
Look at annuities, for example, right? A few years ago, a couple of decades ago, you'd get an annuity giving you close to double-digit returns. At that time, people would be like, put your money in a fixed deposit, you'll get 12%.
Sure.
And today, if someone would offer you a double-digit annuity, you'd be like, oh my God, I want to put all my money there. So I think that's what happens when time passes, that if you are a developing economy, interest rates going down, this transition will happen. And therefore, when you're thinking about your retirement, you will have to look at mixing different things up. There's going to be no one answer. It can't be that, equity is your answer to solve all your retirement problems, or just buying that annuity will solve everything. It's going to be a bit of a mix and match. And I think with senior living as well, I think the decision on whether to rent or to buy is a very, very important decision that you need to make, because you also need to be mindful that you need to enjoy being in that community that you are.
Yeah.
And very often for people who are very busy with their work, it's hard for that to happen. And the good thing is, these communities are now coming into cities. Yeah. Earlier on, they were always on the outskirts or in smaller cities. And I think that was much harder, because you not only needed to adjust to moving into a different community, but also into a different city and sort of learning.
Or a village, yeah.
Or maybe, very small town. So.
Fascinating, gentlemen. It's been an absolute pleasure. Adarsh, Vishal, it's been an engaging conversation. I don't know if we have a conclusion, but I think for me, what I take from this is that the optionality exists, and there will likely be more services down the line for a population that is going to see a lot more older people in the next decade or two. The numbers just point to that. Thank you, Vishal, Adarsh, for joining me.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right, that brings us to the end of this edition of Moneywise. It's been an absolute pleasure bringing it to you. Let us know what you think in the comment section, and do stay tuned. Lots more coming up on NDTV Profit.